Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So as we get this party started, I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves and what they might be experts on. So we're going to start with Miss Abby Goldsmith.
Oh, hey, I am Abby Goldsmith. I guess you just said that. But, so I'm the author of the Sci-Fi Torth series, 6 books. The final book is coming out in May. It's kind of a galactic epic empire with bioengineered superheroes and all kinds of other crazy stuff. And I come from an animation 3D art background, so I've actually written a nonfiction article about what authors tend to get wrong with CGI in fiction. And it's published in an anthology called Putting the Science in Science Fiction.
Go on YouTube.
Nice. All right, next we have Miss Hunter Kay Wallace. She's an expert on chickens and other things.
Well, I'm a romantasy author. I write the Migratory Farmers series, and it's a hoot. And I like asking my friends really personal questions about themselves. Like, what's wrong with you? But I say it nicely.
Nice.
My expert area today is talking about disabilities, largely walking disabilities, like what it's like for wheelchair users. But I also have close friends who have autism or seizures or other things or dissociative identity disorder. That's a fun one. But they like to see these things done correctly because they want to be seen as people.
So how did you become an expert on that one? Is that what you go to school for?
I'm a caregiver.
Okay.
I'm a caregiver, and I'm very nosy among my friends.
So the awkward questions, I got it. I'm tracking. That or you're working secretly for the CIA.
So I don't have proper boundaries.
Or you're secretly working for the CIA. I mean, one of the two. We don't know.
One or two. I just tap everyone's phones for funsies.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's. I'm convinced the CIA invented Siri and Alexa. They invented it so they could spy on us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they give you the option to have it passively send back whatever it's hearing. So, of course.
Absolutely. So next we have Miss Jana S Brown. Sometimes she cosplays as Jena Rey.
Sometimes, yes. In fact, well, not this morning. This morning I was cosplaying as somebody else because I was writing romance. But this afternoon I'm cosplaying as Jena Rey. I'm Jana S Brown. I write nonfiction and I'm a professional editor under the name Jana S Brown. And under Jena Rey, I write all sorts of speculative fiction. I have 21 books out under 3 different pen names. And I love the question of what are you an expert in? Because it's a hard question for me. I'm one of those people that I dabble in so many things that it's like, yes, I can tell you about cooking and I can tell you about fighting and I can tell you about guns and I can tell you about all these things. And mostly it goes this deep, not this deep, but there's a lot of it. So I'm an expert at gathering up information. I love gathering information and learning new things and finding places to go find the answers and then figuring out how to use it in cool ways.
She was also once an expert at making people. So that counts. That's a superpower.
I have made a person. I can tell you what that process is like. And I only made one of them.
There's a reason they don't show it in the TV shows.
Oh, no.
All right.
It's definitely a thing.
And I will say that Jana is definitely a lot nicer than Jena. Jena is the one that sends me the hate mail. Like, hey, you were 5 words short today. Write faster.
True story. You know, if the shoe fits, man, write faster.
All right. Next, we have Mr. Jesse James Fain, the outlaw author himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Jesse James Fain. As JR likes to point out every time, I do go by the outlaw author because the branding writes itself. As far as subject matter expert is concerned, I hate using the word expert. There's always more to learn. But I spent probably 15 years training really heavily, including instructing in various forms of martial arts. Be that Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, I was a traditional folk style wrestler. I got to take lessons in pretty much any style that you can name. I was really blessed in that regard. And I do work that into my writing very often. I like to say I write anything with a sword fight, a fist fight, or a gun fight because I have a lot of family members that are military, so they help me out with the gun side.
Okay. I just know business in towards the enemy. That's what they told me at boot camp. Business in towards the enemy.
That's
Yeah, I think you might do a little bit better than that, Jr. But
I mean,
I get it.
sometimes I pretend. Oh, and the other important thing is don't drop the grenade and throw the pin. That is bad. I saw
Nope.
that happen
Yep,
once.
yep.
That is very bad. Don't do that. Inevitably,
Once the
every
pin
boot
is
camp
out.
cycle, somebody does that. So I wonder if they like give extra, like for drill sergeants, like they reissue them extra underwear for those days, because I know what would happen to me if that was my foxhole. I'm just gonna throw that out there. But I wonder
Domestic hazard pay.
I wonder if the Australian Army has that same problem when you throw a hand grenade.
I couldn't possibly say. I'm sure we have every problem.
All right, Mr. R. Max Tillsley, sometimes known as the Aussie, or just Rob or Robert to his friends.
Hey, yes, so I'm Robert Tillsley. As you say, I write as well as Max Tillsley. I write science fiction and fantasy for adults and kids around 9 to 13. I have, I suppose, my specialty. I'm a longsword fencer and a longsword fencing instructor. I also fight with saber and very badly with rapier. And on occasion, I throw on about 30 kilos of steel and beat people up for fun as well. So, and often I'm using either a longsword for that or an arming sword as well. I have made a sword on a beautiful little Victorian forge. And I've made a few other pieces of armor, and I know well enough to know what I don't know, which is an awful lot when it comes to that.
Well, I guess, everybody's listening to this podcast knows that I served some time in the Army as a basic leg grunt, so no special whiz-bang schools. But I do know about the infantry combat experience from the average nobody experience, not the special forces type. And I am a classically trained historian. I did write my master's dissertation because the school I went to required it on the Conway Cabal. So the American Revolution was sort of my specialty. So if you want to know about muskets and warfare and political shenanigans, let's just say that as much as the politicians on both sides like to talk about the good old days, there were never any good old days. They were doing it back then too. They just did it with nicer language and no cable. So they could probably get away with secrets, whereas now everyone's got their little camera on them. So
It's true.
it's one of those situations where the more stuff changes, the more it stays the same. All right. So I wanted to follow the trend we've been doing, dear listener, of keeping our religion questions themed to the topic. And so today, our first one is, what is the most recent nonfiction book you've been reading? Jesse, I'm going to go round robin, and you get to go first.
Excellent. Most recent nonfiction book I've been reading, I'm going to name two because I kind of bounce around a little bit. There's Joy Jitsu, which is by David Batterina, and it's kind of the martial arts mindset in keeping yourself happy, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a way to find your path out of depression and darkness, and to practice life in a way that would continue to allow you to stay out of the dark forest. To use the same metaphor as the book. The other one is Empire of the Summer Moon, which is the rise and fall of the Comanche Empire, which is a really awesome, nonfiction piece on the Comanche, and starting from kind of their rise as the horse lords of the plains and moving into their final days as basically a conquered tribe.
Some of the places where you can get the rise and fall of, insert people, you can get away with that. But if you want to do like the Romans, you would read till you die and not finish. I haven't seen those mini volume books as a historian. I have. And I'm like, yeah, can I get the Cliff Notes? So good on you for picking one that's manageable in a lifetime. All right. So Jana, what have you and Jena Rey been reading that is nonfiction?
Oh, I had to grab this because it has a fun cover. But this is what I've been reading. It's called Dare to Repair. And it's a do it, isn't it cool?
Love it.
Yeah, it's a do-it-herself guide to fixing almost anything in the home. Because here in Utah, it is finally spring. Even though it is snowing out there, I promise you that spring is here. My tulips and my daffodils are coming up, and they don't lie to me very often. It's just they always get snowed on because that's what happens here. And so it means we've started taking stock of everything that needs to be fixed because that's what you always do after winter. And so my husband got me this book for Christmas Christmas, and it's really cute because it's got all these little interior drawings and all this kind of stuff, very much a 1950s feel, but it's very useful, very easy to act upon how to repair all sorts of random things. So I am reading up because I have stuff that I need to repair.
There's a couple of cool YouTube channels. One of them that I'm thinking of is like the guy grew up without a father. So he's basically all the questions he would have liked to have been able to ask a father. He's answering, like how to shave, these kind of things.
Oh, cool.
And a lot more because he was so successful at kind of taking up that mantle. And it's basically like all the schools, the traits and skills we wished our grandparents had passed along, the forgotten, survival type skills. There are people relearning it and then sharing YouTube videos. So that's a kind of a new rising market. I think we kind of realized, hey, some of that stuff's kind of useful.
Yeah. So,
all right, Abby, what are you reading or most recently read that is nonfiction?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I read recently was Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. And it's kind of a really interesting, a missionary went into the Amazon rainforest to live with an uncontacted tribe in the 1970s and 1980s. And he brought his family and he was expecting to convert them. But they ended up converting him. And yeah, twist on that. But it's kind of like a kind of deep dive into very weird linguistics, because this tribe, like, he had to learn their language from scratch because it had never been recorded or deciphered, I guess. And it was just very interesting because it's like they didn't have concepts for like numbers greater than 10 and things like that. So translate, like, it goes pretty deep into like linguistics, and also just like how an uncontacted tribe can stay uncontacted for so long. So
generally the answer for that is violence.
Yeah, there is a lot of that, but also they really just don't want to be contacted at all.
I mean, there is some peace in nature. So
yeah.
All right, are you enjoying the book?
Oh yeah, I enjoyed it. I read it a few weeks ago, but then I also read The Unaccountability Machine, which is more socioeconomic deep dive into why things are broken today type of thing. Kind of talking about accountability sinks and systems. So well researched, great book. I highly recommend. Yeah.
All right, what about you, Hunter?
I recently enjoyed Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, maybe Harry, and it's very good. Its premise is our focus has gone to crap. Our ability to really focus in and appreciate what we do and do it meaningfully. It looks into some things that have contributed to that, like, say, social media. Is the world actually worse than it was before, or do we just get bombarded with things so much that stress us out that we feel more stressed, and that contributes to focus problems? But it also gave interesting strategies for helping with focus. Like one that I learned that I've applied after reading it is you can go into your phone apps and you can change settings. So you can say only use social media for 30 minutes or only use app X, Y, or Z for this length of time. So that's been really great for me.
So you're using parental controls on yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
I need it. It works.
Okay. Well, if it works, it works. All right. What about you, Robert?
Okay. So I pulled it out here because this title really rolls off of the tongue. Your full guide to owning and operating a hospitality property successfully. Independent hotel, resort, inn, or bed and breakfast by Jerry McPherson. That marketing, I'm sure he's an expert on running hotels and all of that, but I also think he knows how to keyword stuff too. So I'm writing a theoretically cozy urban fantasy. So if you can have someone behead a demon and burn the body in the boiler and call it cozy, but I'm doing that, and the main character has to bootstrap a hotel right after a hostile takeover with no idea of what he's doing. So I'm just listening to this to get all sorts of really interesting ideas and things about, well, what does it actually take to run a hotel?
And I'm not saying he's a serial killer, but I'm just saying I watched him plan out his YA or young whatever classification these choose your own adventure books are. And I'm just saying there was string involved and like lots of bulletin boards. And if we memed it, you would know exactly what we're talking about. So
the best thing about game books, I was just going to say, the best about game books are that you can kill the reader many, many times.
Yeah, I would love to write one of those because I loved reading them as a kid. I just do not have like that level of organizational capability. If you gave me a program that said write this arc and then curve down here and write this arc and we're good, like you do all the branch points and I just have to plug and play, I could do it. But what you do from scratch, nope. My mind hurts just thinking about it. So the ones that I've been most recently reading is obviously I reread, once or twice a year, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, just his take. He's one of the first Stoics. So I find that very useful. And then I've been reading Physics of the Future, How Science Will Shape Human Destiny and Our Lives by the Year 2100 by Michio Kaku. I'm probably butchering his name. Jana's husband calls him smarter than you, Kaku, because he's apparently very caustic in interviews. I've never seen him on an interview with other scientists. Maybe now I know why they don't invite him anymore with the other scientists. If what she has witnessed is true. But
you have to play nice with the other kids or they don't let you come on their shows anymore.
Yeah, I enjoy his take on like what the future might look like because it's not as doom and gloom as other people's. But I also think at some level, like it's almost too utopian. Like when you've seen humanity at its worst, sometimes it's hard to believe that we can reach our best because it's just like, if we could, why haven't we? So I don't know. It's interesting. I'm enough of a cynic that I have to make myself give it a chance, I guess, instead of just like, oh, this guy's a moron. He doesn't know how people act.
So how do you cope with Star Trek?
I do not like the overly utopian post-capitalism. Everybody works for the betterment of all instead of for personal gain. Like none of that worked for me. I resonated with the who's the one that does the deals? Ferengi. Like they at least made sense. They were trying to do better for their families and themselves. That at least resonated. I know they're supposed to be the bad guy, but plot twist, they are not the bad guy. And the warrior race that the Star Trek gave Klingons, like they're the biggest bunch of pushover pansies I've ever seen for a baddie in science fiction. Like just to show how good, insert random tiny female who's like, a 3-foot midget. Suddenly she's kicking his butt because reasons. Why? Because the Klingons are wimps, not because she's badass. I've come to that. I
feel you're hurting an awful lot of urban fantasy here.
Now you throw magic, power armor, you give me a reason, I'm okay with it. I don't care. I'll suspend. I mean, I grew up falling in love with Xena, warrior princess. Okay, like I get it. I want to believe. Just give me a reason. So, and the Klingons are not a good enough reason. I'm sorry, they failed me. But I wasn't going to go there, Robert. Look what you made me do. Look what you made me do.
I mean,
you've lost all your subscribers now.
All right, all 12 of them. All right. So the next question for all of you is, what was your most recent research rabbit hole? So, Jesse.
Oh man, the most recent one. I do a lot of diving into individual historical figures, especially warriors. So the most recent ones probably would have been like John Basson Lone or Daniel Morgan. Just dudes that like just absolutely just stacked bodies. John was the inspiration for one of my characters in one of my stories. Daniel Morgan was more of just a personal thing. I just like learning about that time period. And that's like revolutionary period. But I do that. Lost Nuclear Weapons. That was a fun one. And I still like to keep up with the contested lands between India and Pakistan because they had a nuclear base out there that had convoys going back and forth to it. So I like to check in on that every once in a while. That's a continual rabbit hole because the Taliban are out there too. So you get all kinds of, like, I could write a military thriller in 30 minutes if I wanted to use real life too much.
There's that John Travolta movie where it's like Broken Arrow, and he's like, Stereo. I don't know what's scarier, that we lost a nuclear weapon or that it happens so often we have a name for it.
Oh, and we lose them out of the back of planes over North Carolina.
Yeah, there's one that's still missing, as I understand it, that fell off of a training mission that wasn't even supposed to be on there. Some ordnance guy just messed up. Oops, let's drop the nuclear, missile on the training flight over the continental United States, mind you. That would have been bad. I would like to think, because that was like in the 50s or 60s, that we're better at, that kind of stuff, just with technology allowing you to track things. But then again, I've seen the news recently, so I'm not entirely convinced that's true. So we'll see. If you enjoy the Revolution, you'll get a kick out of go to the Vermont history, the Green Mountain Boys.
Okay.
You'll find a lot of interesting stuff. The mountain folk are unique individuals, especially when you get them away from civilization. They bring a lot of creative skill sets to a conflict.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jana, what is yours or Jenna's? I'm not going to judge. I prefer Jana because she's nicer, but I'm just saying, what is your most recent rabbit hole?
The most recent rabbit hole is studying the city of Indianapolis. So I'm placing a book there, and I wanted to do someplace that I hadn't used before. And so I settled on Indianapolis, and it's a cool place. There's a canal that goes right through the middle of the city, and they have gondolas, but full-on gondolas with gondoliers who dress just like they're out of Venice, and you can go on a sailing ship just down the canal in the middle of Indianapolis with the gondola. And I'm like, that's awesome, because I never would have thought of a gondola and a canal in the middle of Indianapolis, and it was like, no, this has to be a thing. And so now I'm coming up with things that I can do with gondolas and gondoliers in the middle of Indianapolis, because that's awesome. So that's my most recent rabbit hole, is cool things you can do in Indianapolis, layouts of the city, all of those kinds of things, so that I have it for fuel to feed my settings.
Okay. I know some people that were born there and or lived there. I'll throw you a note, put you in contact with people.
Sweet.
So my family owns some dairy farms just north of Indianapolis. So
now I'm upset that the closest town to me doesn't have a gondola thing going through it.
I know. Don't we all need a gondola?
The movie, like a river runs through it, like that's Missoula, and Missoula's the closest town to me, and we don't have gondolas.
You should totally have gondolas and gondoliers, and
the worst street setup in the world.
So
I knew that Indianapolis is for basketball, because I'm a March Madness fan, and so and Hoosiers and all that kind of thing. So I knew that it was a basketball central hub, but then I'm like, gondolas? They also have gondolas. This city has just become so much cooler. What were you saying, JR?
You mention them. You have to have.
No, I said the Hoosiers, but you got it. Larry Bird's from Indy.
Yep.
Too.
Yep.
I think isn't he like the shortest basketball player to make it to the pros? I think.
No, he's not the shortest, because Stockton was shorter than he was.
Okay, I know he was one of them.
Yeah, he's not huge, but John Stockton was shorter than him. John Stockton is amazingly tiny for all that he was. He went pro.
Okay.
Yeah, we want. There's another thing that I have weird expertise in for writers, is that I really love sports. So I've learned all sorts of neat things, and that's mostly because I married a sports guy, and so that increased all the knowledge. Hang on a second. I'm going to go shut this door tight, because my animals are throwing themselves against it, trying to get my attention. So I will be right back.
So I actually took a class on the history of sports as an undergrad, as one of my, easy A classes I needed when I got back from my deployment, and I had to fill some credits quickly. And one of the things you learn, with the exception of golf, almost every sport known to man started as a training ground for young warriors. Yep. And you can almost trace the culture back where it started, and almost all of them started as a way for young warriors to learn their skills without killing each other in the process.
Most of the time.
But yeah, that's an interesting little fact. Like I said, golf, that's the only one I can't figure out a use for as a combative skill. Although there was a movie in the 80s where they used the golf to hit the commanding officer on a horse. It was one of the college, what was it? It's a movie set in a college. Maybe it was Revenge of the Nerds or something. I don't remember, but they attacked the ROTC cadet with a golf ball from a distance. So
Nice.
So are you saying that the premise behind basketball is you throw the grenade, you don't dribble the grenade, get it straight?
Basketball has derivatives from other sports, like the shot put, and the shot put at one point in time was a way you would throw stones and such on a more primitive battlefield. So if you trace the roots back from basketball, you actually can. It wouldn't have been grenades though. This would have been pre-grenades.
And football was essentially a way for villagers to have an excuse to beat each other up. So you're just getting your practice fighting there.
The Calcio Storico, which kind of football kind of borrows from, which it goes back to like it's still played in Florence, and it's the Roman legionnaires ball game, and it's basically MMA with a ball. And you just beat the fire out of each other until somebody hits the ground, and once they're on the ground, they're out.
Absolutely.
See, sports are awesome.
So, what about you, Abby? What has been your most recent rabbit hole?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm writing a medieval fantasy. So my most recent rabbit hole is kind of, honestly, probably something a lot of us have researched. Medieval England, early medieval period. So I found this like really cool YouTube channel called Modern History TV, and it's a guy that's like a professional solid state jouster, and he just like goes deep dives into like aspects of medieval life, like how do they use tally sticks, how do they make a cloak, how do they burn tallow, and how do you create a rushlight, things like that. So I'm kind of like, okay, I want to really put these touches into my the work in progress I'm working on. It's a very medieval world that's basically going to be invaded by the magical Roman Empire.
Cool.
So, yeah.
So that's the one thing that, as a historian, you have to do some level of guesswork for, because the things people wrote down are almost as important as the things they didn't, because they just assumed everybody would know for a point of reference. Like things like, how do we handle, laundry, or what do I do for my stuff because we don't have pockets on these pants, or,
even down to how shields are constructed, because just everyone's doing it. Why would you need to write down how to do it?
I know.
Yeah.
What kind of underwear did women wear in medieval times? No
Often
one wrote
none.
it down because it's unmentionable. But the answer might have been nothing. But we're not sure.
We don't know. Well, I like this channel because he like actually goes and does it. Like he'll try to like recreate. He's like, well, how would you find a rush and make a rush light? And it's like, well, it's actually really hard to figure out what a rush is. So he got the wrong stuff, and then all the people in the comments were like, no, those aren't rushes. You got sedge grass. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, if you want a place where you can do some research, they're basically like Netflix for nerds. It's called Curiosity Stream. There are a few other competitors that exist to that now. We are not sponsored by any of them. I just subscribe to Curiosity Stream, and it's just all documentaries, which are kind of fun. And if you ever want to include food in your medieval stuff, there's a YouTube channel called Tasting History.
I love that dude's channel.
He was a Disney
Yes.
Imagineer, and he blew up on YouTube enough that he could quit his full-time job. And he basically finds recipes from all points of history and era, and then he researches the hell out of it so he can recreate what they are eating and what they would have eaten. And he sometimes has to substitute for like ingredients you can't get anymore. But it's really, really cool.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
And if you're writing medieval stuff, you can watch it. Like that's when you realize that most of us in our pantries have enough spices that we could become kings in our own right of medieval periods, because spices were like a king's treasure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's the old joke about England. They invade all these countries, steal their spices, and use none of them. That's kind of where it comes from, because they were so valuable. I know that the 12 Englishmen listening are going to send me hate mail, but it's okay. So, all right. So, Hunter.
It's fine. If you're English, you can just put blood in it for like blood pudding and stuff. That's flavor.
Wait, they actually use real blood? I thought that was just like the name of the dark.
No, there is actual blood in it.
Yep. Yep.
Very vampiric. Okay, go on.
Oh goodness, that was not my focus topic. So what I have been rabbit holing on lately is King Henry V's. Back when he was Prince Henry V, he got shot in the face by an arrow on the battlefield. So I've been learning how the surgeons removed it, because in my current novel I'm writing, and other surgery-related stuff, I have a surgeon in the book I'm writing, medieval surgeon, who takes a crossbow bolt to the shoulder and has to guide other people through how to perform his surgery.
Ooh.
Nice. What head is on the arrow on the bolt?
Oh, I forget the terms. It's a bolt with no barbs.
Oh, okay, nice, yeah.
That's
so
convenient.
They can pull it out because if it has barbs, they have to push it through, or you risk doing more damage trying to pull it out.
And one thing I learned having had to do field medicine is places you wouldn't expect to bleed a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, you just think, oh, well, it's not an artery. You're okay. Nope.
No.
Sometimes they bleed more because there's a lot of little blood vessels that'll get punctured. And it's, yeah. You get over really, really quickly your aversion to blood if you ever have to do that for real. So I was at one point in time a trained combat lifesaver, but then I had to go to the point where I gave shots. And after like the 5th, 6th time I missed, I got stuck with the instructor, and he's like, Sergeant Hanley, if you poke me one more time and you miss, I'm going to poke your eyeball. And for some reason, that was the motivation I needed. So I passed, and he's like, now I'm going to give you this aid bag because it's part of your kit now, but never use it. Please just give it to someone else and just take your rifle and keep shooting. Because when your expertise is like, I was a squad designated marksman. So when your expertise is shooting things at distance, not quite sniper level distance, but at distance, they're like, why don't you just stick with that and let us pass?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of the things that surprised me about field medicine is how much places you wouldn't expect to bleed.
Yeah.
Which can make seeing what you're doing very difficult.
Yeah, bodies are messy.
Bodies are messy. And if you ever want to see recreations, when there was this Forged in Fire, I don't know if you've ever seen that, where they would test their blades. And this will kill, or however he does that with that weird accent. But
It will kill.
Yeah, they uses the pig carcass because that is the closest to get replicated to humans, and you could watch what some of the blades will do when hitting flesh. Or you could do what Robert does and just do that every week as a vacation topic, where he just goes and he takes his own sword and he hacks people to bits. Totally not a serial killer.
Oh, I've
So,
got a
Robert.
competition coming up on Sunday, so hopefully there won't be too much dismemberment. But
just but a flesh wound, sire. Wait, is it required that you say that at every event?
Oh, that and Princess Bride quotes are.
Okay, yeah, that's acceptable. So what is your most recent rabbit hole been?
All right, so because I've been looking at this whole hotel concept, I've been looking not only at the sort of architecture and style of the Art Deco period, but also how hotels manage things before computers. So you'd have these whole setups of cards which would track the condition of a room, whether there's a guest in there, is it getting cleaned at the moment with a guest in there? Is it getting cleaned without the guest in there? Has it been checked? All these sort of things. That use color codes, that have cards, that have these great big arrays of little boxes to slot everything in to track what's going on. And then, you'd have things like, mail. You always see it in movies. Did someone leave a letter for me and things? I've never had anything left for me at a hotel, but that would have been relatively common. And so they would have needed, pigeonholes to store mail for different rooms and things like that. And then, again, depending on location and era, pneumatic tubing started to be a bit of a thing. So delivering messages through and things. So it's really interesting. I'm struggling with the visuals because there's so much AI content out now that it's actually becoming hard to track down genuine photos of buildings that still have their original architecture, their original interiors, or even some of the old ones. So I'm at the stage now of thinking I'm going to have to start going to secondhand bookshops and search for some of those big sort of coffee table books, because I've been looking at them on Amazon. It's like, do I have $200 to spare on this rather pretty looking book? Probably not.
I mean, that is one way to justify, like, as research when you're buying things you probably didn't need, but you could write off on taxes.
Yeah, but I have to go through my accountant, aka my wife. So yeah, far more scary than any tax.
Yeah,
Your
the
IRS
roughest of accountants.
nicer than ours. All right. And so for me, I have been diving into the concept of space colonization and what genetic diversity might look like, because everyone's like, well, if we've got the technology to go into space, well, then we've got the technology to fix the issues of, genetic inbreeding. If everyone's too closely related over time, that would cause issues. I don't know that I entirely buy that. I get why modern-ish sci-fi TV had these small villages, because they didn't want to pay a lot of extras. And until recently, you couldn't just AI generate a big, huge crowd and make, a small group look a lot larger. Or you could do what Rings of Power did and do it so badly you can count, like Waldo, how many times that guy is in the same scene. But
so sad.
It was so bad. But like, one of the reasons you see the smaller villages, and I'm thinking like Stargate, for instance, or when Star Trek would go to these villages, is because his budgetary consideration. But realistically, if there's only like 2 families in that village, you're quickly going to have problems. If you want to know what that looks like, follow the reigning monarchs of any European country. Look at what happened to the Egyptian pharaohs, where they married their sisters year after generation after generation. And so tracing what genetic diversity might look like and how you would account for that and what that looks like. There was an article about, I think it was the leopards that were almost extinct, and when they rebred them, it was the same line. So one illness could take out all of them, because they're all susceptible to the same thing. You could run into some of that as well. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know that I entirely buy that, we'll just wave our hands and say science will fix that. So I've seen anywhere, because obviously this is all guesswork at this point, what you would need on an ARC ship or a colony ship, but I've seen anywhere between 500 distinct lines to 5,000. So it's an interesting thought exercise.
Yeah, and do you find, have you sort of thought about having essentially embryos from a much greater pool that could then easily be shipped frozen to expand the gene pool without needing the big capacity?
It'd be more cost effective, I think. I mean, than whole people. Well,
no, you would have to. Well, unless you have some sort of tube where you can like raise them in a vat, like Hugh Howey did in A Long Way Home, which that was great. And then they were living in VR, growing up in VR, so they could have the experiences. So that way, when they came out, it was like they lived a whole lifetime, even though their body was like flash cloned. That could work. The other option is obviously send people in some sort of cryostasis or generation ship, and then when you get there, introducing the new genetic stream. So your baby as the guy might not actually be genetically yours, because they're pulling one of this, random streams of genetic diversity from storage. The issue with that is, there's radiation in space. So how do you shield the material to make it protected, so that way there's no defects caused by that? So it's a whole fascinating theoretical concept. And so I find it really interesting, because I've been looking at some more branching out from just straight MILF sci-fi to like MILF sci-fi meets space opera, because I really like some of that expansive stuff. And so I've been toying with that idea. So that has been my most recent rabbit hole. And now we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we're going to jump in and talking about using those experts and crafting fiction that is both meeting the rule of cool and entertaining, but also not making crap up when the facts are better than your fiction. So, all right. And with that, we're going to play that commercial.
Alien Days is a multi-author anthology with thrilling tales of aliens, invasions, artificial intelligence, friendship, deceit, and extinction. This combination of stories makes it a must-read for science fiction short story fans. This anthology features Nebula and Dragon Award nominees, Amazon bestsellers and award winners, alongside rising stars in the science fiction genre. Let the authors take you on adventures through dystopian worlds and far-flung planets that will stretch your imagination. Welcome to Alien Days.
All right, before you get on me about that image, yes, I know that it's a Disney starship. It was made by a fan that sold the rights to other people, and then Disney started using it. So yes, the rights were there. The publisher is not using out of pocket. I've gotten those emails, people. I'm just saying it's legit. All right, just throw that out there. All right, as we get started, Jesse, when you are doing your rabbit hole research and you're reading your nonfiction, what is your drink of choice?
I make homemade wine. So generally, if I don't do a lot of rabbit holing because I write a lot of action, and thankfully I'm blessed that that's kind of my field, so I don't have to do it so much. But if I do get caught up in something interesting and like a historical figure or something that I really like, I'll generally pour a small glass of wine, and that'll ride with me.
Nice. And if you want to do some fun research Joseph Plum Martin. He is the only private soldier in that he was a PFC, well, private, they know PFCs, to write a memoir about his time, sometimes called Private Yankee Doodle. Joseph Plum Martin's memoirs. He was there from the start to the end, riding with old Georgie boy. So
hey, there we go.
All right, Jana, when you are doing your rabbit hole research, is it still Dr. Pepper or do you mix it up?
It's still Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper is my love, and it's still Dr. Pepper. But I do tend to eat jelly beans. I don't know why, but jelly beans is a rabbit hole thing. I like jelly beans when I'm studying stuff. Yeah, see?
What kind of jelly beans?
I got gummy bears, and that's like
hold on. Let's because we've got some of our listeners who are jelly bean fanatics. So gummy bear fanatics. What do
you have nice Black Forest organic gummy beans, gummy bears from Costco.
The Jummy Bears.
I bet you pronounce
it. It's a new thing.
Yeah, and see, I do Jelly Bellies.
Hold on. We're going to show the audience because we're going to tease them with food. This is now the food cast again. Ooh,
I love my Jelly Bellies.
I like the Starburst ones. The Starburst jelly beans.
Those are really good too. My husband, because he got great big lots and lots of husband and daddy points this last week. We had been eating from a big thing of the assorted Jelly Bellies. And so, you pick through that and you go, okay, that one's gross and that one's gross and whatever. But you like most flavors. Yeah, the licorice stuff. So we're lucky that with the three of us here, we can usually find somebody who likes it, but you have to sort and go, this goes in Dad's thing and whatever. So he paid attention to the ones we were keeping for ourselves. And then he ordered custom bags of Jelly Bellies for us that only had the flavors you like. So I have an entire bag, and my daughter has an entire bag that are Jelly Bellies, only the flavors you like, which is better than what you can get at like the Jelly Belly store, because they'll say it's only popcorn. But I like more than popcorn. It's one of them. So now I have a whole bag that is all the flavors that I like, and he got all the husband points.
That's in brilliant. My family, if someone's doing that, they're trying to buy a new tool or a new gun. What was he trying to
buy? MechWarrior 5 has new DLC.
Okay.
And so he's like, it's the Ghost Bear one, and that was one of my favorite things back at MechWarrior 2, and I kind of want to download it and play it all weekend. And I'm like, I'm going to a writing conference, so what you do while I'm at the writing conference, as long as both you and the child are still alive when I get back, I don't care.
Okay. Abby, what is your beverage of choice when you are writing or doing your rabbit hole research?
Usually some kind of herbal or cinnamon kind of tea, and I usually put a cinnamon stick in it.
Yum.
Yeah.
What kind of cinnamon tea? So when I was in grad school, there was a Tiavana, which was like the Starbucks. It was the tea for tea, Tiavana, and they had this tea that tasted like Big Red gum. It was cinnamon, but not too much, but just enough. And I've been trying to recreate that, and as of yet, I have never found it.
That sounds good. I wish I had that. Yeah.
Oh, see, that's no help. I thought you were like, no, I totally got that. That's what I'm drinking.
No, I'm always looking for new ones, but it seems like one out of or kind of 4 of every 5 teas I try aren't really great. So they're hard to find.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Hunter? What is your beverage and apparently snack of choice? Well, we know the gummy bears. What is your beverage of choice when you're doing your rabbit hole research?
I could be the spokesperson for Circle. Circle is water with a flavor cartridge. Oh, yeah. It has a flavor cartridge in it that you can change out. So this current one is called soursop flavor, but it tastes like cotton candy.
Product placement, that cost us $10 for that spot. Like, thank you. I don't know if that's actually how it works.
It gets me drinking water.
I get it. We're good. All right. So, Robert, what is your beverage and snack of choice when you were doing your rabbit hole research?
Alrighty, thanks to my sponsor, Pepsi, the taste of a new generation. So I have that, but to keep my caffeine down a little bit, I also drink Twinings English breakfast tea. And for snacks, my favorite, which I should not have, licorice bullets, which I don't know if you get over there.
Never heard of them.
a bit shorter than an inch, maybe, of licorice, relatively thin, and then that's coated in milk or dark chocolate. It is absolutely fantastic, and I like them like moderately stale, so that the licorice is fairly hard and chewy as well.
Okay. So for me, when I'm actually doing research, for whatever reason, just because my academic training, it's always water, because you couldn't take drinks into the library when I was in school, in grad school. I know some libraries will let you now, they'll have a little cafe area, but that was not a thing. I mean, I even had to learn to use the Dewey Decimal System, people. So when I was in grad school, that just was not a thing. So it's always water. And then I would sneak in some Mike and Ike's, because that is the most delicious candy known to man. The original, though, none of that sour, none of that watermelon, none of that tropical nonsense. The original OG Mike and Ike's. It's my crack. So it used to be I would keep some on hand for when I wanted to study, but I realized I just have no portion control with Mike and Ike, so I just get them as I need them instead of keeping them on hand. Because if I've got 10 in the house, I will eat 10. My teeth will hurt, but it will be delicious. So with that out of the way, all right, so we're all obviously writers here, in addition to having some level of expertise in certain topics, and we've also probably consulted others who are experts in things. That's one of the first things you realize when you're writing military science fiction is, like, I was a sergeant in charge of at platoon level. I have no idea what happened in brigade and battalion and all that, because I didn't want to know. I wanted to stay as far away from those people as possible. There was where the bad juju went. So first, obviously, you have to recognize what you don't know. But how do you balance fitting in things that are factually correct, but still keeping the rule of cool and keeping it entertaining? Because sometimes reality is just boring.
Cutscene. I don't want to see how you use the bathroom. We'll just skip to when you're done and say that while you were there, it wasn't pretty.
Well, so we all know from Star Trek, in the future, we do not actually have bathrooms. That's why they didn't build them on the Enterprise, because they got compatibility. We just don't have to go to the bathroom in the future.
That sonic shower was.
Yeah, I was about to say, this guy doesn't know how to use the show.
Well, part of it is good lamp shading, because, we talk about, especially in science fiction and in fantasy, there's a lot of things that we can excuse the factual accuracy with either technology or magic, but you have to put that in there, because when you don't lampshade it, then people just think that you don't know, or that you are dumb, or other things like that. And often you know the thing, but either it doesn't align with what your story wants to do because of rule of cool, or maybe you don't know enough and you don't want to go deep into the weeds, but you need to show that you know enough, or that you've learned enough from people who are experts, that you can lampshade it and you can say, yes, we know that faster than light drives don't exist, but this is how I'm lampshading mine. Mine is wormholes. Mine is this kind of drive. Mine is dilanthium crystals. Whatever it is, it gives us the lampshade that says, I'm going to acknowledge that there is a fact here, but I'm going with cool. But you have to acknowledge it. When you just leave it out, then you're going to get someone in your reviews that go, they don't know this fact. And especially about horses, guns, swordplay, there's some things where the people who know it are rabid. And so you have to at least acknowledge what you don't know.
Medieval clothing.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, yes.
I had a reader, a beta reader, who was flagging when I talk about someone reaching on, like, his pocket is sewn onto his belt because they're not sewn into the clothes. And someone was like, this isn't a pocket. And I realized, okay, I'm going to have to call it a pouch, because that's what, because I'm going to have to find the medium between being correct and being perceived as correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, like, terminology is a huge factor, even if you're getting across the concept. Like, if you look at sword work, a lot of terms that we use come from far later manuals, and they also come from very specific nations. So Roger Zelazny does some very painful sword fighting in his Amber book. So I love the series. Talking about moving to 60 and 40 as he's doing all these things. So that's as effective as me talking, if I was talking my books and I was doing like a fantasy set in a completely unrelated place and start using German terms. Oh, he did a Zornhau. The reader's going to go, what does that mean? So we've got to be really careful with our language use to make sure that we're actually conveying the right concept, conveying that image to the reader without expecting them to have a huge amount of assumed knowledge.
And it's really important when you're writing medieval-esque fantasy, and Robert has gotten on me all the time, you want to use studded leather armor. They love that stuff. The historians will
Oh. Come here, Jaya.
Look,
every time someone says the word studded leather, you just replace it with gambesson and you take a deep breath.
No, you actually are probably talking about brigandine.
Oh man,
so
I just know that gambesson, is more affordable, right?
So gambesson would be your padding underneath, again depending on your era, and that might be an arming doublet or things like that. But
you mean when you wear the bikini bra, you're gonna shake if you don't have something under it?
It depends. So you might be using it to hang your armor off. So especially if you're using plate, we have what we call arming points, and that's all attached, and a lot of stuff hangs so that the weight is well distributed and doesn't move off. But with studded leather, you'd what they're actually seeing are rivets where behind the fabric, whether it is leather or silk or many other things depending on the wealth and the era, and that you'd have little metal plates which would allow a somewhat flexible but quite strong level of protection. But yes, when they were doing D&D, they had no idea what they were looking at.
I think a really important thing is what I'll call filing the serial numbers off. And if you're writing on Earth, then it's got to be Earth, right? If you're telling people like, hey, this is late medieval period Europe, then you gotta do late medieval period Europe stuff. But if I'm writing in Jesse's, Jessalowstan works however Jesse wants Jessalowstan to work. Like that's, and especially if you have any kind of magic or anything like that. So there's always
like one thing that I think has helped put a cute little touch on mine is, so pigs were pretty ubiquitous in Europe, medieval England and stuff. Changed them to lardvarks. So
nice.
It's like, yeah, it's an aardvark, but it's kind of fat. And
I love it.
Well, and Jesse's totally right, but the thing that you still have to have is there has to be enough similarity, because people go into fantasy realms and that kind of thing and they go, what in the real world is this kind of like? Because they're looking for a frame of reference. So you still need to understand the frame of reference enough that you can go, yes, I understand it's going to be mithril, which is still a chain kind of shirt, but it's going to be really lightweight and it's going to be good against magic and it's going to have all these things that we couldn't get in real armor. But because people know what real armor is, then you can take that across. And there's a lot of those that you have to check off. So I'm an editor professionally, and a lot of my job is to go through and put in things that say, this does not make sense, which means you've either got to lampshade it for me or you've got to go do more research because I'm finding holes in it. So I'll do an example. I had a gal who had a planet where it was raining all the time. And it's like, okay, we did some research and found out that was actually possible. We figured out what that would mean. But then she built houses that went underground. And my brain stopped because I'm like, well, but all the water would pour into their basements all the time and it would be wet. And I asked her why that didn't happen. And she said, I don't know. Don't be stupid. We all have basements. I'm like, that's because you live in a desert. This is why in New Orleans they don't bury their dead people underground, because when the storms come up, the bodies come back. That's why you have mosques and mausoleums and above grade ground tombs, because you don't want your uncle coming back up the next hurricane. And so it was a thing that I knew if it stuck out to me that much, I don't care if she wants to put a technological thing around that. Your houses have force fields. For some reason, they need to be in the ground to be so they're stable because the ground is moving all the time, but it has something that makes it so that this works. But I needed that. What is the something? Because what I know about reality is that if the floodwaters come up to the side of my house, it's going down the window well and directly into my basement. And that's what we have to do for our readers, is there's got to be enough fact and then enough lampshade that they'll say, here's your suspension of disbelief.
I love what you're saying with that, because one of the things in Australia, we basically don't have basements. I'm sure there's a few here and there, and the reasoning, in my mind, essentially, is that we have a huge amount of space, so there's just not a massive need for underground rooms, even though certain cooling benefits and things like that. And so, if an author is making assumptions just based on what they've come up with, what they've lived with, and that might cause all sorts of problems when they're trying to make a book that's readable by a much broader population than their local town.
Yeah, and I think little details can be powerful too, like the lamp shading. Like, I realized with the lady that I work for who is paralyzed from the mid back down, I've worked for her for about 2 years, and I only realized the other day why it is that her bags are never zipped. Like, bags for like snacks, she always has a bag clip on it. It's because she has low dexterity in her hands. Mm-hmm. So I can zip the bag, but she can't unzip it. So like things like the bag clips or using a grabber or using these other funny little clever things can add that little bit of realism where then people will buy into, oh, this person actually thought this through.
Yeah, you got to get the little details right so they'll believe the big shining lie. One of the things I ran into when I was writing The Reservist for Galaxy's Edge, and I was working with Jason Onspach, who was my point of contact for that novel. And one of the things we ran into was there were certain points where, from a military strategic standpoint, you wouldn't do certain things a certain way, but it made sense from a story point because it was cool and it allowed you to show the characters. It's why you see in the war movies the main characters never have their helmets on, even though, like, no, put your helmet on. It's there for a reason. It covers you for a reason. But obviously, you want to see the actor, right? Because that's people are paying money to see, Bob Pitt or whatever his name is, right?
Chris Evans. That's why Captain America keeps losing his hood, is because Chris Evans is hot.
Right, and so
any Chris, right? Hemsworth as well. His advice to me was acknowledge that, hey, this is the ideal, and then basically acknowledge that you're wrong, beg for forgiveness, and follow the rule of cool, because they want to know that even if story reasons you can't do that.
Yeah,
right, but you're making me cry about armor that never works when you talked about taking off helmets.
So that's the one thing that I had to learn as a historian. Like, one of the first things we do as a graduate level is they had to remind us that we assume, because we have knowledge that they wouldn't have had, that they were stupider than us. And so they might not have had the same base of knowledge, but they were smart individuals because they survived in inclement conditions. And so they didn't do things that didn't work. So you don't wear armor if it does nothing for you. You don't carry shields if it does nothing for you. Yeah, in every movie, you carry a shield and then they cut through it like a hot knife through butter. And it's like, well, then why did I just lug this 20 pounds of steel around?
Stormtrooper armor.
It's the same thing with Schrodinger's car, where the car, you can shoot through it and it explodes, but somehow you hide behind a door in a gunfight and it stops every bullet. It's one of those things where, like, it's plot reasons, not a good plot reason, but plot reasons, when they wouldn't have done it. And there was a recent study in Greece. So the Greek army had their special forces guys, about 100 of them, train like Greek hoplites. They wore the armor, ate what the Greeks would have ate, and they ran around doing like PT and stuff that they would have done. And then after a month of living like this with the food and the conditioning, they had them do a mock battle. And shocker, what looked like it was just cumbersome and cartoonishly decorative, when you use it for real, like, holy crap, it works. It's almost like they didn't want to die, so they found ways not to. And that's one of the things you have to accept, is like, when you're looking backwards, is they did things for a reason, and it wasn't because they were stupid.
Yeah, I will accept that. I mean, that comes up a lot in back to disability, because that's my area. Like disability in fiction or in movies, where like you see a character with a disability who just like kind of gives up because they can't do it, and it's like, no, in the real world you either die or find a way. You problem solve this. If you have, like, whether it's a magical issue or a science issue or an actual disability, you problem solve this until you have a way to do it.
Abby, you had something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I love how learning about the chaperone hat, the medieval chaperone hat, it's kind of like they were kind of showing like in all these movies like Lord of the Rings, you see these hoods like just flapping in the wind and there's like cold wind blowing in, and they were like, no, in actuality they had kind of a separate piece that would go very snug around your face, and then you can turn it, roll it up, and it becomes a hat, and it's like, yeah, and that
pictures. Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other things is people don't realize is because everyone thinks, oh, they were shorter back in the day. And if you go back far enough, it's somewhat true, not as much as people think. The reason we think people's heights are what they are is because it wasn't like we had disposable clothing like you see with this pop-up. You spend $5 for a shirt, you wear it once. Who cares if I never wear it again, right? I mean, obviously I'm a Grinch, so I care. I'm Scrooge. But like some people wouldn't care, whereas back then, like clothes were hard to come by. They took a lot of effort to make them, to weave them, to sew them, to dye them, etc. So you patched it until it couldn't be patched anymore, and then it became like diaper rags or rubbing rags or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was used until it was no more. And so what you end up getting that survived are the extremes, the really tall stuff or the really short stuff, because that was the stuff people didn't wear until the legs fell off. And then you add that to older houses because of heating and cooling conditions. They built higher ceilings so that air would circulate, which is why a lot of doors have that transom window that would open over the door. It's to let air circulate. And then factor in also it looks shorter because their beds were shorter because they thought it was unsafe to lay flat at night. They slept in a recline because they thought it would let the good humor or bad humor, I guess. And so like when you start understanding the reasoning behind things, it can add cool plot points. If you're talking about any pre-industrial society, that can add kind of cool angles.
Although I will say, I grew up in New England, and if you've ever been to like that Wang Theater in Boston, it's this old theater, and my knees just hit the seat in front of me, and I am not tall, and I'm just like, really? They must have been suffering.
Or they
I don't know if any of you have been to the UK with some of the old pubs. I stayed in one for a couple of weeks in the upstairs, and it's your classic Tudor building. And not only does the upstairs level like sort of go up and down in these crazy sort of things with the floor, but also the ceilings are like so low as the whole building is just slowly crushed in under its own weight and hundreds of years of flexing and weather, and it's like I feel like a giant and I'm not 6 foot.
That same thing happened at my college. We had an old art building that was built by the original students in the early 1900s and had not been more than just some like new drywall. That was it. And it felt like being in an H.H. Holmes hotel. Like the basement just was absolutely creepy. There were staircases that went nowhere. It was like, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's why we put the artist in here. Is like, we're going to put all the people that their brains work a little bit off in this one, because me and the exercise science guys are going back outside. Like, this is not, we're not keeping this.
So,
yeah, go.
I was going to say, you had something to say, and then I'll have a question I had for the group.
I was going to say, I love what you're saying there, Jesse, because that it reminds me, and I think, Abby, you probably know with your medieval fantasy style things, well, is to remember that buildings have been repurposed, rooms have been repurposed, and you can add like a glorious amount of believability by making things slightly inconvenient or slightly weird, because it just gives that feeling of a living, breathing environment. It's not just, oh, wait a second, we built this on the set of the studio 2 weeks ago. It all looks like there's history behind it, even if you don't go into that.
One of the things people forget is very few cities are entirely planned. There's a concept of urban sprawl. It happens for a reason. As cities rise and fall in prominence, if this becomes a more important city, people just start adding on to it, and sometimes it's a haphazard. And you look at these roads, and it's like, what were they smoking? And it was a combination of years of adding and subtracting on things. And in fact, the few cities, at least in the U.S., that were planned and then accounted for growth are the oddities, because they're the exception rather than the rule.
Salt Lake City is like that. In Utah,
Atlanta.
we plan our cities are in grids, And so you can get, when you find somebody's house, you get the east, west, and the north, south, and you can get anywhere because all you have to do is know where 0 is, and you count it out. And so it was planned out to count that way. And the roads were, when they were settling in Salt Lake, they wanted them wide enough that you could take a wagon and team and turn it all the way around in the middle of the street. So we have wide roads and everything counts out. But that is way atypical. I've gone lots of other places and I'm like, how does anybody find anything? Because it's a name and a name. Where are the numbers? And the answer is there aren't any because most places don't do this.
Oh, you guys are a heaven send. Over here in Missoula, Montana area, we had 2 brothers that planned out the city. They got in a squabble. They cut it down the middle. They each did it their own way. One used squares, the other used diamonds. It comes together in this functional, like wavy triangle, like intersection corners all through the middle of the city. And it's like, should one of you have just apologized already?
Yeah, that's
before
terrible.
it got to this point.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's strange enough no one will believe it in a book, though.
There have been plenty of times where I've had editors tell me that, like, this doesn't sound believable. And I'm like, well, I can show you the incident statement. Like, when I use my military stuff, I'm like, this happened to me. I can tell you the date. I've still got the statement of charges because I broke something. Like, I don't care. No one's going to believe it. And you see that sometimes when you quote actual historical events, like, oh, this would never happen this way. And I'm like, well, at the Battle of, I don't care. No one will believe it. So how do you balance that as being creative of getting things factually correct, but in an entertaining way? Do you just acknowledge that you're wrong and then have fun, or do you try to incorporate and take the time to make it more realistic?
It's really important for me personally to have things as like accurate as possible, but still make things cool. But that's why I do all of that, like reading and things like that. And I've been there when stuff you wouldn't believe, or had friends that have been there when stuff you wouldn't believe happened. Like people, especially like, you know, I'm speaking from like the fighting aspect. People don't they don't do things that make sense a lot of the time. And there's so much going on, so much coming into your brain at once. And I know probably most of the other people on the panel can speak to that too. Like, especially if you got any kind of gear on, or you're like, there's all kinds of stupid stuff that happens with your shirts. Like, I'm sure everybody's seen that dude on video that's like knows he's about to get in a fight and pulls his shirt off. And you're looking at that dude and you're like, why in the world is he doing that? Well, it's because some guy literally reached over and pulled his collar up over his head and started beating him one day. And now every fight he's ever been in for the rest of his life, the shirt had to go. And so there's all kinds of stuff that, like, if you don't know why you're doing it, it's not going to track. But I've one of my favorite stories from my brother's time in Afghanistan is that the machine gunner fell right when they started getting shot at the top of a hill, and he accidentally bumped the lever that lets you change barrels on the machine gun. So the machine gun barrel went down the hill.
You're going to get like renewed PTSD from this, because I was a machine gunner once.
And so he literally, they were like, hey man, screw it, use the spare. And he was like, no. And he took a deep breath and he went, I got it, and ran down the hill and got the barrel. Like, it's just, there's all kinds of stuff I've seen. Yeah, I've seen dudes like decide to throw a head kick when they were half drunk and on, you know, in the middle of a bar brawl, and like decide. I've seen guys throw double-footed drop kicks in real life. Like, there's all kinds of just nonsense that, like, too many kids that grew up watching pro wrestling and now, like, they think that that's legitimately what they need to do.
Well, you live in the South, where Hold My Beer is the start of a lot of really interesting stories.
Yeah.
And I might have been guilty of that at once or twice in my youth. I'm just saying, I was an intemperate young man. But it's one of those things where if you don't sometimes catch things in film, like, no one would believe it. So, like, we had this one incident when it wasn't even like a real FOB. It was the training FOB out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, forward operating base, where we're preparing to go overseas. So we're in the middle of a snowstorm. We're doing desert warfare training because that's the Army. And so, like, we're told to leave your tent, you have to wear battle rattle. So your boots, your Kevlar, your webbing, your flak jacket, your rifle. That is your battle rattle. everything else was implied but never said. He had to go to the bathroom really, really bad. So he's running out there buck-ass naked with his boots, his Kevlar, his flak jacket, and his rifle. And I remember I was on guard, and I just looked at him, and he goes, "It's cold, stop judging me." And he just kept running. And if I wrote that in a book, you wouldn't believe me. And so that one guy in Afghanistan was wearing his heart shape or white boxers with the hearts. And somebody, the National Geographic got the picture. But if we hadn't had that picture, no one would believe it if you wrote it. Because right. Sometimes stuff just happens. And balancing.
But I think
go ahead.
Sorry. I think part of what you're hitting on, both for that problem and then for the other problem we get, which is that we research so much that we want to put all of it in there. And that's where you get really big info dumps and other things, because it's the author who desperately wants to share all the things they've learned in the last 6 months about this, that, or the other. And I think that's where it's really important to get into your character's perspective. It hasn't always been the case, but right now a lot of what types of stories really drive audiences are very character-driven stories. They like being able to connect to characters and see things happen and that kind of thing. And so it's using that character perspective, because if I'm going to tell that story, well, then you go with an officer like you who's standing on guard and goes, well, that's a thing. And that lets you then do that thing that people would say that never happens, because you've got that insert for those people that goes, well, that never happens except now. I've now just seen it happen. And with the getting your facts in, you think, what would the character know about this? Not just what do I know about this? And so we start with, how do we convey the facts through the character? And then when we pull out from that, what else is actually necessary to make the story go? Not just cool, because we study an iceberg worth of stuff, and you may only use 2 lines in the scene, but they're the right 2 lines, and they're the thing that makes the scene. And you don't have to tell everybody the rest of the iceberg, and no matter how cool it is. Save that and put it in your newsletters. It's great marketing.
Actually, I think what you said about audience is super important there. It's one of those things that I don't come from a military background, so reading a lot of military sci-fi and a lot of technical details got me thinking. And it's one of those things. Sometimes your audience absolutely wants that detail, and as long as you understand who your audience is, like the urban fantasy I'm writing, I'm playing around with the concept from a book I read called The Wizard's Butler, which essentially is about a guy who becomes the butler, funnily enough, for a wizard. What do you know? It's in the title. But the minutiae within that is actually the concept of the novel. It's the conceit. It's the key thing. So without it, it sort of becomes that there's nothing there. But as you say, if it's a very character-driven thing, then just dropping a few points that create that feeling of realism, but don't drown the reader in the details. So, like, when I'm doing a fantasy, I'm thinking about what sort of armor am I wearing? Well, okay, what sort of weapons does the opponent of my main character have, and all these sort of details. I don't need to have a 5-page or entire chapter dissertation on the choices. All that world building can happen in the back end, and then it's just coherent when it comes in to the into the story itself. And if you want, you can have your little moments where you're like, aha, but this works this way because that particular sort of armor was doing that, or they couldn't steal that money because the pouch was on the belt with leather strapping or something. You can just add those little details that show that you've thought about it and add flavor, but without sort of drowning them.
Unless you're George R. Martin, and then you can just throw like 3 chapters about why the flags are important.
Oh my
Tolkien
God.
and trees, or
yeah, Tolkien did it too. But I like that level. I'm odd. I like the level of detail. So it's definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah, just like some people have a high tolerance for description and for detail, and some don't. And I tend to be on the Tolkien-esque side of I don't mind as long as I am hooked by the characters and story. Which, that's hard to do. Yeah. Anyway, go on. Sorry. Yeah.
So normally our audience is readers, right? We talk to people who consume the product, but just in a general term, because sometimes people want to know what happens behind the scenes. If you don't know something, how do you find subject matter experts?
Internet.
I'd say if you know someone that you're comfortable talking to where you think they know this, talk to them. And if you don't, a really great place is, say, YouTube or Reddit, because you can look at people, you can get a wide pool of people who are happy to go in and talk on a topic. Like I was looking up the other day, how reliable is lip reading for deaf people? Reddit had a huge amount of input, and the answer was, it's not reliable. We're guessing because a lot of words mouth exactly the same. But it was fascinating seeing what person A and person B and person B all had to say.
Yeah, I would agree. And for me, like for my Torth series, like I needed to consult with an astrophysicist to figure out how exactly would a mutant super genius with a lot of minions end the universe. So, like that's not something I do not have a base in physics at all.
And you can't Reddit that.
No, you cannot. I mean, I tried. Yeah, I needed help there.
So how did you find your physicist?
I think I asked around on Reddit until someone volunteered to help.
Reddit scares me sometimes with some of the comments. I'm just like, is this like where all the asylum escapees went? Because sometimes,
Yes.
Yeah.
and that's sometimes Reddit can be a scary place. And that's the other thing is when you're looking for experts, like how do you vet them, right? Because sometimes people say they're experts at something, and I'm thinking very iconically, Ancient Warriors was a show on the History Channel where they would take, they'd research the history of various warrior races, their equipment, et cetera, and then you would talk about their equipment, and then you'd have some sort of computer program that war gamed out in a combat with now the known variables, who wins, the famous knight versus samurai, which in reality doesn't happen because technology, offense and defense is a yin and yang, and it develops in parallel. Mm-hmm. But this program sort of bypassed all of the natural history and let them, fight. Turned out the guy that was supposed to be the Green Beret combat expert was not. And so he got caught and it became an issue. So obviously, you have to vet your subject matter experts, which can sometimes be troubling. Same thing with anything you're reading on the internet, which is, why you go back to some of the books, although some of them have problems too. So it is definitely at a certain point in time, you kind of just got to trust your gut.
Yeah, and you have to be a bit careful as well when there's a lot of, we just know these things. So even knowing that you need an expert matters. Like there was a big thing for a while where it was like, that they didn't actually parry with the edges of their sword because that would damage the edge. It's like, we've got manuals. We know that they were done. That there's this sort of view that swords were, passed down through generations and things. It's like, no, they're ceremonial swords. Swords were pieces of equipment, in the same way that I'm sure, a rifle used by a soldier eventually hits a point where it's just done. And you can't swap out a blade most of the time.
Well, and a lot of professionals. Sorry about that. A lot of professionals are really, really happy to talk to you about anything. And so, like, I have two relatives who are both police officers. And I'm like, I need all of this information for an urban fantasy where she's a police officer. And the things that they were willing to sit down and talk to me. I went through all of the post training with a friend of mine because she's like, you will understand police officers so differently after I make you run until you barf and memorize all of these flashcards. Here's the stack of flashcards. Memorize all of these. And that's going to tell you something. And then she did let's practice with handcuffs. And now you're the dummy, and I'm going to knock you over and handcuff you, okay? It's like, you're going to, what? And I'm on the ground, and she's like, and the thing you learn about women is how you slide your feet up, and you don't just step, because if they're on their front and they're big-chested at all, you're going to step on something you don't want to. And I'm like, well, there's detail I never would have thought of. So they're happy to take you for ride-alongs. They're happy to take you anywhere that you can go, in order to give you more information, because people who are passionate about the things they do are often very passionate about writers getting it right. And so if you contact them and say, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law run a ranch, And so they have 35 acres, they have horses, they have this, that, and the other. Everything I ever write about horses, I send it to them because they are very invested in making sure I don't screw it up. So there's a lot of people who want to talk to us, but like you said, we have to know that we're missing the information, and then go find people who love it and let them fill your well, because they'll do it and they'll let
And
you
their
try.
spouses
And
will
that learns
thank
things.
you because they didn't have to listen to it for that one night.
That's true.
So you're doing a favor to their spouses too. So it's noble. Yeah, that's the thing is finding them, and then finding those that are willing to talk, because I found, at least when I was reaching out to people, sometimes they just assume there's a scam in there somewhere because we become very jaded. I'm like, no, I promise. Here's my website. I've got books out. I promise. Which I imagine if you're a new writer gets a little more difficult because you don't have like a body of work to show somebody.
JR, it also make me think, because I know you've, from your military background, it's been a while since you have been enlisted as a soldier and all of that. So, as well, not only do we need to know that our experts know what they're talking about, but we have to consider whether or not they're up to date. And in fact, they might even be too up to date and not know how things were done. Like if you wanted to set a mystery in the 60s with a doctor, you don't want to talk to some 30-something doctor because it's going to be completely different.
Yeah, it's not only up to date. Sometimes it's got to be back to date because things are, eras change. In fact, I strategically wrote the series I was working on with James when he passed. I set it in my time of service because I didn't want to have to relearn how everything happened. And my frame of reference for conversation would not work in a co-ed infantry because some of the things we just said when boys were being boys, mocking each other is not politically correct. And, when you start introducing co-ed situations and you have to worry about sharp complaints, well, you're gonna behave differently. And that's a factor too. And so you're right. It's not just that they know what they're talking about, that their knowledge is for the right era.
I had two recent examples of that. One of my back burner projects is a project that's set like just after World War II, and involves like a ranger and then like an outlaw. And I started working on it, and I know the guns. I know the bar. I know the Thompson. I've been blessed to be able to at least pick them up and mess with them a little bit. I know how all that part works. I knew that part, but things like how do you carry magazines in the 40s? How do you carry your medical supplies? What's the pouch work like? All those things, I have no idea. I have the modern versions. They're all sitting either in the trunk of the car or back in the safe or whatever. Like I know how to work all that. And even as recently as the 80s, I had a buddy who was setting a story in the 80s, and he had an ATF agent. And trying to figure out what pistol to give him was a nightmare. It's nowhere on the internet. It's like the story's in 1986. Well, apparently that's exactly the year that the Beretta 92 was adopted by Federal Services. So depending on literally down to the month would depend on what pistol we want to give him if we want to be accurate. So sometimes you got to verify multiple sources. Sometimes you got to wing it. And sometimes you just don't know.
Absolutely. And sometimes you just have to make an educated guess, and only the people that really know the finer details are going to get too upset. Although I will tell, and I made this mistake in an early short story, it is not a blood groove, and they get really mad when you call it that. Even though anybody that was trained at a certain era, like that's what we were taught it was called. Like we were taught that was gospel. It was a blood groove, and so the blood could pour out. And then you were like, no, that's not actually what it's for. We were wrong for years. And so that's the other trick is, as experts, because I've been a military advisor for people's fiction, is knowing that sometimes what I know just isn't so because I was told wrong and I just hit the right I believe button and I perpetrated the inaccuracies. I realized that when somebody told me something about Iraq on one of the monuments, I'm like, oh, it's to Lawrence of Arabia. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And we moved on. I didn't think about it. And then for the podcast, I looked it up for someone. I'm like, oh, it definitely was not for that. It predated all of that. You know what I mean? It's like, well, how many other times have I just spouted stuff because it's what I was told, but it wasn't right. And it makes you.
I mean, like going to what like Hunter, her experience as a caretaker and with disability, like the main character in my tour series is disabled. So, I asked caretakers and I asked people with the actual disability. And it was there's a lot of things that you don't even know that you should be asking the right questions. Like, so I just feel like there's a huge amount of research that needed to be done for that when I started out, I didn't think about or didn't even consider. So
that is the hard part, knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Yep. There is a way to avoid some of these problems, a shortcut, and that is called cheating. So the current thing I'm working on, I actually set it on a new country where the land essentially rose up out of the sea, but it's in modern times. Why? Because I can do what I want with it, and it's given me all these opportunities to play with history and things like that. But it's not Australia, it's not America, it's not the UK, it's not New Zealand, it's this place, and so things work the way I say it, and you cannot disagree with it.
Absolutely. All right, so this is a fun one. I feel like as we get more narrowed down, the kind of the topic would be a lot more niche if you're focusing on a specific area, and we wanted to be more broad. But the general rule is, when in doubt, rule of cool is what's going to win, because it is fiction and it's supposed to be fun. And so unless you're writing like historic fiction, which I don't write because I don't want to be nitpicked to the nth degree, I just want to have fun with my escapism. And if you want to see what that looks like, watch the people in the comment section for the Richard Sarp series, where he teaches them to do the butt loading, where they basically spit the ball in the powder and then they slam the buttstock into the ground to load it without a ramrod. Like, oh, they would never do that. Except reenactors have tested it, and it is possible. Now, is it good for the rifle long term? No, but this was the heat of a combat situation where getting rounds down range was how you won the day. So might you take the risk in combat? Sure. And so watching experts argue when it's even just historically ambiguous is enough to make you realize that historical fiction is the way insanity marches. And I will not do it. And with that, Jesse, well, first off, this is where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part, people. And with that, if you have any follow-up narrowed down topics within this, hit us up. I'll be happy to host those. And now that I said that, Jesse, where can we find you on the wild interwebs?
Easiest place is going to be outlawauthor.com. That's going to link you to everything else. It's going to take you to X, Substack, Instagram. I have a personal Facebook. Feel free to add me. Again, as I warn everybody, that's tattoos, that's guns, that's heavy metal, and that's a lot more unfiltered version of me. It's a personal page. But come hang out on any of those platforms.
And Jesse, I'm so old, I remember when Guns N' Roses and Pearl Jam were considered heavy metal.
Yeah.
There was a time.
I heard them on the Soft Rock channel the other day, and I'm like, where has the world gone? I died a little inside. Oh, all right, Jana.
Oh, no, I'm sad because you're right, because I heard AC/DC and Rush both when I was at the grocery store. I'm just like, no, it's not fair. But where you can find me, it is the golden oldies. And anyway, you can find me at opalkingdompress.com. All of my various personalities hang out there, as well as occasionally open calls for anthologies. I've got a couple that I'm doing this year that I would love to see your work for. And then on Amazon, on Facebook, on all the usual places under Jena Rey or Jena Rey Author or Jana S Brown or Jana S Brown Writes. So I'm around and about. I'm not very good at hiding, so come hang out.
So Phoenixes and Griffins are the topics for the anthologies this year. Should be fun for all you fantasy writers. And this is the part, Jana, where you get to shake your fist at the sky and scream at them to get off your lawn.
Get off my lawn! Oh, my very sad lawn, because, it needs to be raked. So instead, come over to my house and rake my lawn, and I will feed you cookies, because I'm that kind of old lady. So,
all right, Abby, how can we find you?
I'm just Google my name, Abby Goldsmith, ABBYGOLDSMITH. I have a presence on everything except for TikTok right now, but I'm not using Abby Goldsmith everywhere, but you can find me probably.
And I will link to all of it in the show notes. And next we have Miss Hunter Kay Wallace. Where might we stalk you online? I mean, follow you and your chickens. I'm going to peer pressure you till you get chickens again. Dang it.
I don't know when I'm going to check this again. That's my problem. It's the only thing that you truly remember about me, JR, and it's not even true anymore.
So that's actually how I found you as an author, because, like Facebook likes to recommend friends of friends, and it was a picture of you with chickens in a mountain setting, and I'm like, that just looks dope because I want to live in the mountains and have chickens. So I sent you a friend request because I saw you were an author, and I said, let's talk about your books, but really I'm like, let's talk about chickens. And
I know about canning, and I was like, I don't know about canning. I know about chickens.
Yeah, I was so excited of chickens, and I don't have those anymore.
I'm bummed too.
So how can we follow you on the internet?
You can stalk me on the internet at hunterkwallace.com, and I'm also on Facebook. I dabble in things like X and Instagram, but really Facebook's going to be much more up to date.
Okay, and last but certainly not least, Mr. Robert R. Max Tillsley, the Aussie.
Alrighty, all you need to do is turn your computer upside down so that it's compatible with Australia. And then you can find me at tillsley.com, TILLSLEY.com, or on Amazon, or on pretty much any social media except for TikTok because I'm too old for it.
So I will link to all that in the show notes, and I will. You get a kick out of this. I tell you this all the time, and I'll say it one more time in case they haven't caught those episodes. So I'm writing a book that has Australian military units, and I obviously want to get it right. I did make them reservists because then if I get it wrong, well, they're reservists. Of course, they messed it up, right? Like that's what I do for the U.S. too. But some people have sensitivity readers. I was told to write a proper Australian. I needed an insensitivity reader because I had to be too nice. And then the other part was explaining to the Australian soldier who was doing my beta reading that I couldn't use the C word like you Australians do, because you use the C word like we use the F word. But if I use the C word, Amazon's algorithms will silo me like it's illicit content.
It's also tricky as well because it can be positive and negative depending on the phrase and the situation
and the intonation, right? Like, so it's definitely a thing you got to watch out for when you're talking. About and then the other thing you'll get a kick out of is, so I recently interviewed debut author Emily Tanner. She writes Harem Lit. Friend of a friend hooked that interview up. It was a lot of fun, but I made the joke that Australia isn't really real because if you're a flat earther, it can't be real. And I have had legitimate arguments with people before I realized I would just never argue with a flat earther again because they believed Australians weren't real. They were New Zealander crisis actors living on an aircraft carrier. And I made that joke as one of the shorts. It got used as a short, and some reason it's blowing up on BitChute, and I've got like hundreds of views, and now I've started getting letters, and I'm like, I am in Australia, and it is real, and I'm like, allegedly. That's all my answer is, allegedly.
I got a YouTube notification for that short yesterday. Like, it just unprompted, just boop.
It's getting traction because all the people sending me hate mail, and I just respond allegedly every time because it's just funny.
Yeah, you see, I'm actually hanging upside down, so I look the right way up. It's all a scam, I tell you. We're not real.
That's why, like, you have the Australian, like, Mars. What is that? Like what's the Australian marsupial that like goes upside down and
like a ringtail possum, maybe?
Yeah,
are you talking about the drop bear? The legend of the drop bear?
It's not a legend; they're real. Damn it! That explains all the missing tourists. And that's what we tell you, and you're meant to believe it.
It's a koala, right?
So all I know is that the Australians love the Bloomin' Onion, and they definitely love their Foster's beer. And if you want to have a lovely chat with them,
lies.
And the shrimp on the Barbie.
Shrimp on the Barbie. All right, and with that, you can follow us, dear listener, dear viewer at home, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Spotify, the Discord. That's new people. Come and join us. Our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people save the shenanigans. For Madam Stabby Stab over there on Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show over there at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee until they float away on a river of good Java. And if you want a part of that, you can use the code Podcast Crunch. Link is in the show notes. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, people. It is not a drop shipping operation. No, they roast those beans in America. And now they're shipping international thanks to the gift of Amazon Prime. We don't get a benefit if you buy them on Amazon. So if you want to help us out, go to their website. But if you do buy them on Amazon, be sure to put the Blasters and Blades podcast sent you. And maybe they'll send us free stuff. Because, I got hooked on my own supply and I've got a problem, people. And maybe I need help. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Hanley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And before I hit the end button, I can see on the back panel of the Coffee Rant Coffee who's buying where. And I have to say a decent percentage, I'd say like 40% of all of our sales are coming from Stabby and I. So like I said, we need help.